the biggest gap is having willingness of people to actually see ideas and go, wow, we could do something with that, or you could do something with that. And I think that's the area that I love, because that's where possibilities become realities and you can just work together to make things happen. And I think one of the things which is a gap is basically if there's not a willingness of staff, again, to step out of comfort zones or to do anything, to challenge themselves and to do anything differently compared to what they've done before.
Today on the show, we are talking about creativity, learning, and what happens when ideas meet the real world. This is School to Startup, powered by Traction, a private market intelligence platform that's been helping students, faculty, and universities for over 12 years. Through our university partnerships, we get to work with institutions driving real innovation, and this series highlights the academic leaders making that happen. I'm Harish, your host today, and joining us is Professor Nicki Wragg, Vice Chancellor for Academic Program Innovation at Swinburne University of Technology, Melbourne. Nicki, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Harish. It's great to be here.
Great. So let's start with something fun, right? So if a design student's portfolio could speak at a dinner party, what would it say? I'm polished, strategic thinker with clean guts?
That's an interesting question. I think if a design portfolio could speak, it would say, I'm confident, I know how to interact with people at all different levels of the design process and different stakeholder groups. It would also say, I'm diligent in my thinking and I explore every possible avenue, both visually and also the background that goes into it. But I can say that in a way that is quite beautiful and quite aesthetic, because that's what always draws us in. It's not just about the beauty, it's about what something says, but the way it's delivered.
Interesting. You've also studied how portfolios help students bridge the classroom and the workplace. So what makes a portfolio actually speak for someone?
It's a very interesting question, because I think there's a lot of websites which talk about the top tips for folios and what students should be putting in their folios. And I think sometimes we forget the importance of the conversation and the dialogue that goes along with the portfolio. And the portfolio is, in and of itself, is not the thing. It's about how somebody can describe their work and what they do with their work. What's the background? What's the process that they've gone through to arrive at a design solution? And also, what are some of the challenges that they've had to overcome through the process, what they've learnt, and then what from that learning is transferable to other projects.
Interesting. So you've spent years thinking about creativity. So from your experience, what actually gets in the way of creative thinking, and how do we move past it?
I think sometimes people don't think they're creative at all. I think there's a misnomer that only artists or designers or more people in the creative industries are creative. But I think creativity really exists in all of us. It's about looking at things from a different perspective. It's about not being happy with the first answer that you've got, but exploring more deeply. And sometimes the things which do get in the way are time, deadlines, budgets, but also a lack of willingness to step out of our comfort zone. And so, sometimes we often talk to students about, take a creative risk, and students might know what that means. And so it's really just about actually be prepared to step out from what you know and move into a different space. And I think that's a really important thing to be able to do. But that's probably one of the biggest things which will be a blocker.
Interesting, and this is becoming interesting. A quick pause for our viewers. If you're enjoying this conversation so far and want more episodes where academia meets entrepreneurship, go ahead and like, comments, and subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you don't miss the next on Traction channel. Right, so back to it. You talk a lot about visual communication, not just making things pretty, but making ideas clearer. So how can design help people understand things? They don't even have words for it.
They can help understand things in relation to clarity of meaning. Our world is quite complex, and written ideas can be quite complex. Spreadsheets can be quite complex. Information diagrams can be quite complex. So the role of a visual designer or a communication designer is really to cut through the complexity and to be able to communicate with clarity. Now, sometimes that's using words or typography. Sometimes it's using image and type. Sometimes it's filmic and video based. And so it's really about, being able to communicate things more universally and being able to draw out and help people understand, what are those areas of complexity which we can make simple. And not, when I say simple, they're still very complex ideas, but how do we make sure people understand and are able to be on the same page or start from the same position to actually work through what is required?
Amazing. You've also pushed for education that's more applied, more real. What needs to shift in how we teach if we want students to graduate ready for uncertainty and not just for exams?
Yeah, that's interesting. Again, one of the projects that we did here at Swinburne within the design school was to remove the grades from first year units or our core group of units. And what was interesting there was it really relied on greater dialogue between the lecturer and the students, and the students and the students. And what's a lot of people in design will say, but we do that already. We give a lot of feedback. But I think that the nature of university has been changing. And so with change comes a nature to the types of dialogues that you actually have with students. And depending on, the type of lecturer you are, that will also be different to the other lecturers' types of feedback. So by removing the grades, we were really aiming to increase intrinsic motivation and to be able to take the pressure away from students just aiming for a high grade, but actually putting that thought into deep exploration. But one of the things which was interesting there was we also engaged industry in looking at the portfolios of students after the semester. And so that took on another life of its own, where they were actually talking to professionals from first year and allowing them to think about their work in different ways, to talk about their work in different ways, but to get that feedback from industry, which, you know, some of them would go away and actually change their work based on that feedback. And so, you know, you start realizing that, you know, design is just not one long process that goes and you've got this perfect idea. It goes through all these iterations on an ongoing basis. And to be able to do that, you have to be able to look at things from different perspectives and either take on that feedback or understand the feedback first, interpret it in a way that makes sense for that project, and then apply that in a way. So, you know, it's consistently a process of, you know, listening, thinking, and then applying or speaking. And so how do you actually do that? Because it's not going to be the same every single time. And how do you be ready to sort of work through that and understand and sift through those ideas, sift through the feedback, and work through it as it relates to your own project.
Interesting. And you also founded the Bureau, a student-led design studio that tackles real problems, right? So what changed when students stopped working on hypothetical beliefs and started solving actual ones?
Look, that was interesting. The establishment of the Bureau was interesting. At Swinburne, we've always had a very intense placement program in the design school, and that's been going for a long time. It's been going for over 60 years. We were really understood that sometimes students didn't get placements, but maybe they wanted to be able to have that experience when they worked. And the work within the Bureau was actually quite fantastic because it was quite a range of different types of projects, not just internal university work or university design work. We had clients from the heavy vehicle industries. We had clients from, you know, researchers coming in with their work. We've had external clients, and one client was the World Health Organization. And so in terms of how things change for students, the Bureau is really set up as an agency. And so an air of professionalism has to come into play. They have to be there the 4 to 5 days a week, depending on what their contract was, and they have to be presentable. They have to be able to talk about their design. They have to have confidence to do so, and so it did become absolutely a real world industry placement for them, and you know, you see them grow throughout. I mean, it's fantastic to see the students from not just when they start the Bureau to when they actually graduate, and the types of jobs that they go on to get. And that experience in the Bureau has been really beneficial for them, because in some instances they've worked on a much broader range of projects than they might get when they're doing a placement in industry.
Amazing. You've also seen both sides, right? Academia and the startup world. What's the biggest gap between school and startup, and how do we close it?
I think, you know, look, it's an interesting one, because I think the biggest gap is having willingness of people to actually see ideas and go, wow, we could do something with that, or you could do something with that. And I think that's the area that I love, because that's where possibilities become realities, and you can just work together to make things happen. And I think one of the things which is a gap is basically if there's not a willingness of staff, again, to step out of comfort zones or to do anything, to challenge themselves and to do anything differently compared to what they've done before. And I think that's the main thing. I really, how do we close that? I've been lucky enough to be at Swinburne for quite some time, and Swinburne has always been known for its entrepreneurship and its creative way of approaching solutions and problems and solutions. And we currently have an area which is the Swinburne Innovation Studio, and that houses the Design Factory Melbourne, which is part of the Global Design Factory Network. There are lots of activities within the staff body, and also within the student body. We have an entrepreneurship club, which has got about 300 plus students involved in it. We have an entrepreneurship champions group within the staff area, which goes across the university. And then Swinburne Innovation Studio, they hold a lot of master classes on at different times, and so all students and all staff are invited to participate. So there's venture cups as well, which students and staff are invited to participate, as well as elevate and initiate programs, which are like incubators but will take students and staff through the processes if they've got particular projects that they want to work on. And so I think, in terms of closing the gap, that's one way, but it's also about having this kind of understanding of what an ecosystem could look like, an entrepreneurial ecosystem could look like, and understanding that entrepreneurship is varied, and it can happen in research, and it can happen in teaching practice, and it can happen between, stakeholders and collaborations between partners and state and academics. And so I think it's looking at the broader sort of scope of what entrepreneurship is, and being able to sort of work with that and get people on board.
Very interesting. So before we wrap, for students or early stage founders watching this, what's one mindset shift that could really change how they learn, build, or take the next step?
I think be open to possibilities. Don't be afraid of possibilities, and also understand that innovation and commercialization is a long process, and it's not something that goes quickly. And so I think there's a level of resilience that students have to have, and understand that, one of the things which is certain for the future is that students have to have an entrepreneurial mindset to be able to navigate uncertainty. And as part of that, they need to think about the broader sense of what creativity is, because creativity is very much a part of that, but it doesn't necessarily have to be about the creative industries. But I would say the mindset, the resilience, the staying power, because innovation is not always a big idea or something which just happens. It's something which you have to build.
Amazing. Today's conversation reminded us that creativity isn't just a talent, it's a process. And education works best when it's not just informative, but transformative. A huge thank you, Professor Nicki Wragg, for joining us and sharing your wisdom. And for our viewers, if you found this episode valuable, do us a favor, like, comment, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an episode. This is Cool to Startup, powered by Traction. See you in the next one.